Friends, thanks so much for being here. We're so glad you could join us today. Since we have Dr. David Sanders here, I'll also give a plug that Melanie Grunwald will be here next week, since they work together, and she'll be speaking about embracing impermanence for mindful living. And we're very happy to be partnering with Kabbalah Experience. And we're thrilled you're all here for this program today, our relationship to time, reflecting the counting of the Omer. Really interesting stuff. Dr. David Sanders, founder and spiritual director of Kabbalah Experience, combines over 30 years of experience as both a psychologist and Kabbalist, helping guide people to deeper awareness and fulfillment in their lives. His transformation from religious studies to mysticism intrigued him to broaden the study of Kabbalah to practice spiritual growth. Transformative Kabbalah combines traditional mysticism, contemporary psychology, and quantum physics. There's much more to know about him, and in the interest of our learning, Alex is going to post his more full bio, although that only scratches the surface also, into the chat so you can read that. And with that, Dr. David Sanders, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. If those who are not on video are able to come on, that would be fabulous. I always like to see people if I can. And I see that some people are eating, and that's totally fine as well. Since we're going to be talking about time, let's do this quick one, which is, what time is it? Yes, Bob. It's 4. It's 4. Okay. Does anyone have a different answer?
The time is now. Is that what you said, Judy?
Reb Shmuley?
That's what I said.
Beautiful. So that is what we call living in the present moment. Because we're going to look at some artifacts of our relationship to time. After all, here in Denver, it's 1 o'clock, or just slightly, I'm sorry, 2 o'clock, just slightly after. And everyone can be in a different time zone. Even people can be in different days, which is an interesting thing when it comes to the counting of the Omer. We may get to that point later on. I titled this "Our Relationship to Time: Counting the 50 Days." So I think I posed in the in some of the write-up for this short discussion the following statements. Have you been curious about your relationship to time? What makes today Thursday or 2 o'clock? Since we've dealt with already that, what time is it? It is now. Have any of you thought about what it means that today is Thursday? What is Thursday?
It's an agreement.
Was that Judy?
Yeah.
Thank you,
It's
Judy.
an agreement.
Okay, so say just a little more about that, because I agree with your idea.
It's Thursday because we say it's Thursday, and we could call it Yom Chamishi. We could call it anything we want, but it's a day. It's so we all know that on a particular day things happen.
Right. So it's an agreement, and it's a tool, right? It's a very important convenience for us to have this kind of way of communicating with each other about time. But if we dig a little deeper, why is today really not Thursday, even though we've agreed that it is?
Because it's not connected to any natural cycle, the day of the week.
Exactly. It is something that we have chosen, right, to create just like many other things, we create a way of communicating with each other, and this is the way we communicate about time.
But Rabbi David,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, please, Warren.
In the Torah, in Bereshit, there originally wasn't any time at all in Gan Eden, and wasn't time imposed as a punishment by Hashem for not following his direction about the acquisition of knowledge.
Well,
I remember I learned that in a Torah study myself some years ago in a kollel.
all right. Well, intuitively, that idea does not make a lot of sense to me. And I'll explain why. Because we start with a Torah narrative in Bereshit of what? This is day one, right? Then it says each of those day, and again, we don't have to take it literally, but it's already, the Kabbalists actually suggest that time was created already in the very beginning.
Well,
And
yeah, it says the beginning, and then all it demarcates is when he rested.
yeah, but Gan Eden doesn't start until, I mean, Gan Eden may have been there, but in the narrative, the human connection doesn't occur till the sixth day.
Right, but again, I'll look it up while we're talking.
Yeah,
But
right. Thank you, please. I appreciate it.
yeah,
So by the way, there may be a way to connect these ideas, and that is that, and we're not going to sort of get into that today, but there is a difference between the time dimension, right? Time from the physics point of view, time as a dimension, which is also, by the way, mentioned in Sefer Yetzirah, which is an early mystical text, that there is dimensions, there's space, there's time, and there's soul. So time was seen by the Kabbalists as a dimension. And there's a difference between the time as a dimension and our measurement of time. And our measurement of time is certainly by minutes, seconds, minutes, days, hours and days and weeks, right? So we measure it that way. So Warren, you may have a point there that the measurement of time, if in fact that was the basis of that teaching, that the measurement of time was not there before the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Or I should say good and bad. I've actually tried to change that translation of the tree. All right. So if you do find it, by the way, Warren, bring it to our attention. Third point, while we acknowledge that time never stands still, what has us feel time dragging on or moving quickly? The counting of the Omer contains many insights about our relationship to and with time. And here's the key point that I would want to have us discuss and think about and dialogue about. And that is, we will discover that we are not passive passengers through time, meaning that we are active co-creators of time. That's the piece that we're going to get to. Now, the way that I want to push this discussion forward is by first talking a little about when do we count down and when do we count up. So we'll get to the counting of the Omer, the counting of these 50 days, because clearly that's something that we count up. But what are in our relationship to time, what is it that we count down and what is it that we count up? And we're going to try to understand what the distinction is here between counting up and counting down. Any of you are welcome to give your input.
Well, on the negative side, in suffering, my nature would be to count down. Like, how much more of this do I have to deal with? How many more minutes? How many more seconds?
Perhaps it's a question you might ask in the dental office.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, interesting idea. What are other people's thoughts about what is it that we count down to and what is it that we count up to? If you notice, my style of teaching is I like to be interactive.
We count down to a rocket launch.
Excellent example. What are other examples of what we count down to? So therefore, Reb Shmuel, it doesn't always have to be suffering. But what is it that we're counting down to?
I notice that my kids tend to count down to things they're excited for, like how many more days until we go on a trip or we get to have a sleepover with friends, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent example. Could we also include in that what children, I know my kids are right now counting down. For one, it's hours. The other one is still days when school ends.
I would say there might be some relationship to certainty. I would count down if I knew the number of days involved or minutes or hours. I might count up if I didn't know what the endpoint was.
Okay, so let's follow what Reb Shmuley is saying, which is what would then be some examples of what it means to count up? If following,
well, if you're counting, let's say you're taking inventory, you start with 1 and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You count to accumulate. You count accumulation where you might count down where you're disaccumulating, where you started like 100 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer wall, 98. So you're disaccumulating, you're using up. Whereas when you're counting inventory, or let's say you're counting houses on your street as you go up the street, or you're counting locations in a warehouse, the numbers increase, they don't decrease. So you say, I have 1 location, 2 locations, 3 locations, 4 locations. You take inventory, you go, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't start at this. The computer says I have 100. I need to count down and see what the remainder is. You don't count to the remainder. You count for precision, whether it's additive or taking away, I think. And I'm sort of mathematical, so I'm sort of thinking about it.
Absolutely. And even what you're saying, Warren, also applies in a way to time itself, right? Because that's really what we're interested here, not so much in things, but in time.
Well, think about you count up your age as you're born and you live. You go first birthday, second birthday, third birthday, fourth birthday.
Right.
But let's say you find out you're going to die, or you're going to have a procedure. So then you sort of count. The doctor says you have 6 months to live. So you go 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, and then you hope you go into the next dimension and you keep living. But
all right, good.
And I found the chapter in Genesis and I copied it to you, by the way. So I found the passage in Genesis.
Is it in the chat?
Yeah, it's Genesis 3:19 to 3:24.
Okay, great. If we have time, we'll return to that. Okay, Warren?
Yeah. No, I just want to tell you I did it. I don't want to.
No, I very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't counting down towards it. I was just counting up. So what else do we count up? Let's use pregnancy as a nice example. Do we count pregnancy up or down?
It depends. Well, you count up in gestation, but when your wife's anxious towards the last month or so, you're counting down to the due date, right? The women say that, right?
Okay. Yeah. So now let's go back to what Reb Shmuley said.
Yeah.
He introduced this idea, which was, he called it certainty, right? That we have adopted, and I want to be clear about this, we have adopted the notion of counting down to something that it doesn't mean that it is certain, but that we relate to it as certain. So, Warren, you just said in pregnancy, there's a due date. Now, any midwife or OB doctor will tell you that the due date, and maybe even parents know this well, the due date is what? Is it a certainty?
It is if your wife wants to be induced, like mine had no patience.
Well, guess what? Even an induction doesn't mean it's certain. Now, if you have a scheduled C-section, and nothing else happens, then we could say that that's a countdown towards that. However, the distinction is very important here, which is that when we are counting down to something we have a sense and we're thinking it's going to be certain, like school is going to end on that day, a retirement will occur on June 30th, we then count down to it. But pregnancy, because we don't know when the baby is going to be born, and your example of age is a really good one too, because we don't know how long we're going to live. So we count up. Okay. So that's the distinction. Is that clear to everybody? By the way, Judy, your example of counting down to a rocket launch. It's because, Houston is waiting for that moment to say 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and at that point, but we also know, by the way, that what could happen even with a rocket launch?
Well, it can be stopped because there's a problem with the plumbing of the rocket.
I think the term is called Houston, we have a problem.
Yes.
All right. So
no, sometimes it's just a hold. Sometimes it's a hold for a procedure. It's not always a problem with the rocket. Sometimes there is a procedural issue, or whether
I agree.
I have a daughter. One of my daughters works for NASA. So use an example where I've been schooled. My
All right,
daughter's discovering life on Mars.
all right, wonderful.
Mhm.
Judy, yes?
We count down to Pesach because there's only a certain number of days that we're going to be able to get ready and clean the house.
Mhm. Okay, so Judy,
Pesach doesn't move.
all right, so Judy, this is going to be a beautiful segue to the next issue. So Judy just posited for us that we would count down to Pesach. Why? Because Pesach doesn't move. So Judy, why are we counting up the 50 days to Shavuot? The logic should be the same thing that you just said, and also what we have in fact decided on as a what we call a paradigm, right? Which is we count up to things that aren't certain, and we count down to things that are certain. Now, we do have a caveat, right? Which is, and the caveat, which we're going to see is very important, is that in fact, those things that we think are certain may not be so certain. And therefore, maybe we really should adopt a different way of looking at time, which is we should always be counting up. Not that we should suffer more, if that was the issue, but we should be counting up
Mm.
instead of counting down. But let's add, we're going to have to go through a little more discussion about this, and we're going to see what the Kabbalists had to teach us about this.
Well, there's one very important one we're counting up towards, and that's the hostages. We would like to count down to when they'd be free, but we've counted up to it's 229 days now, and we keep counting.
Yeah, by the way, today is,
There is no date. We just keep counting up. Yeah.
by the way, Warren, beautiful point.
Yeah.
And in fact, this year, the Omer counting exactly coincides with the not the 200, but the other number of days that the hostages are held captive. In fact, I wrote a blog about that this morning, which is that we're counting today 230
Mhm.
of the days that they've been in captivity,
Yes.
and it's the 30th day of the Omer. So, by the way, perfect example, we're counting both up. But the challenge is what Judy pointed out. That's the challenge.
Mhm.
Challenge is that while we don't know when the hostages might be released, that's why we're counting up. We
Mhm.
do know when Shavuot is. It's on the calendar. So why are we counting up the Omer? We should be counting down. Now, this question is not a new question. It's a question that's been known for a long time.
Mhm.
And I was privileged, actually, back in the year 2001, to be in Jerusalem with my younger brother. And I went to hear a talk given by one of the, well-respected rabbis in Jerusalem. His name is Moshe Shapira, and he weaves in Kabbalistic teachings into his talks. And he wanted to address this question. Why are we counting the Omer up? Why are we counting these 50 days up and not counting it down? And I was fortunate to be in the audience as he explained his view of why we do the opposite of what it would seem to be making sense for us to do. Was someone wanting to say something or ask?
I had a question. Does it have something to do with our leaving Egypt, and we had to wander in the desert almost to change and sort of become free and get rid of all of the baggage of leaving Egypt? And then only then when we were ready, and we also, I think it was to familiarize ourselves with I guess you'd say, the battlefield, the territory, and we would know who all our possible opponents would be. But the most important thing was for the people to get rid of all of the baggage of Egypt and come together as one person, and then Hashem would have us enter the land of milk and honey again, return.
Okay, but I'm following what you're saying, but why would that have an impact on whether we count up or down?
Because you're counting to a goal, which is Hashem says it takes a certain number of days, or Hashem knows. And maybe we didn't know up front. I don't know. Moses knew.
Okay.
Moshe knew, didn't he?
Well, without necessarily answering that question, I will say to you that you're skirting an answer, but you're close to it, which is an answer that often is given. We'll see a different way of looking at it, but let's take a moment to give credence to what it is that you're suggesting.
Okay.
Because students, when I teach this, some students have come up with this answer, and it does cover certain ground about our understanding of it. If we are just commemorating what they did, meaning what the Hebrew slaves did as they exited Egypt, it's quite understandable to say that they didn't know exactly how long it would take them to get from the border of Egypt to Mount Sinai. So in a way, they were counting up instead of counting down because they didn't know when Shavuot was going to occur. Okay, so I think that Warren, you were kind of getting there. But let's remember that the Torah commandment of this is actually found in Leviticus, and it happens after Sinai. So although it's possible that we would kind of look towards what it was that they were doing, this is a account that we've been doing for thousands of years. And we go back to Judy's point, which is, even if they didn't know, we do know. And once the calendar was given, and that was given already after Sinai, it should then be clear that we should be counting the Omer down and not up. All right, but there's legitimacy to the path that you were trying to suggest. So I would like for us to take a look at a text. Is there somebody who hasn't spoken up yet who would be willing to read this?
The counting of the Omer teaches us that, contrary to what we think, time is not a fixed entity which causes certain changes in events. This time here, it causes a certain response. Rather, our actions may be a deeper yet. Time is dependent on us. Put sharply, our counting builds the reality.
So this is a teaching that is found actually in a book by Akiva Tatz. Reb Shmuley, I'm assuming you're familiar with that teacher, also from Jerusalem. And that's in one of his books. But he's quoting Rabbi Moshe Shapira. Now, I don't know if Rabbi Tatz was in the same audience I was. I didn't see him. But that night, I listened to what Moshe Shapiro was teaching. So Isaac, I know you read it fast, which is fine. But what might you have seen and in those words and how does that strike you? What is the innovation here in a way that is being suggested by this rabbi?
Would I be able to see them again? Forgive me.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would I be able to see the words again?
Oh, sure. By the way, I'm asking you, and I certainly don't mean to put you on the spot, but this is not an easy teaching to get. And had I not heard it in person, I don't know if I would have been able to fully appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I may need your explanation.
Oh, my pleasure. Is there anyone else? Judy, did you have an impression about what Rabbi Shapiro was trying to get at here, or anyone else? And I can put it
it's
back
an
up.
extension of the experience we have of reenacting the Seder. In reenacting the Exodus annually, each year we assume that we were slaves in Egypt and that we have the experience of coming out of Egypt, in the same way that even though we know when Shavuot is going to occur, by counting the Omer, we bring it closer until we're done counting. And even though we know intellectually what that number is going to be, the experience itself is important to have as an extension of that going out from Egypt.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. In order to help Isaac's process along here, let's go a little deeper into our understanding of this. So, first of all, it's interesting to note. Do you know that Shavuot is the only holiday that has no date mentioned in the Torah? Isn't that curious? Do all of you know what the date is on the Hebrew calendar? When does Shavuot fall every single year? It's in the month of Sivan. It's early in the month of Sivan. And it always falls on the 6th day of Sivan.
Mhm.
That's been set for a long, long time on the Hebrew calendar.
Mhm.
However, in earlier times, as the Talmud says, Shavuot can fall on the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th.
Hmm.
Why would that be? Well, because they used to start the months when witnesses came and said they saw the new moon.
The lunar calendar. Yeah.
Right. We're still following a lunar calendar.
Right. But they didn't have clocks then. You didn't have mechanical clocks in those days. You
Right.
had to have some other way to demarcate a month. So I guess it would be the phases of the moon. That makes sense.
Correct. So if the moon, so therefore it could vary 5, 6, or 7, depending on whether the month was called full or the month was chaser, empty. I mean, it was not a full month or a less than full month. Okay. But that's not necessarily the answer that we're looking for here, right?
Mhm.
Do you notice that what Rabbi Shapira is saying here is that the counting is the deeper level?
Yeah.
Now,
There's kind of a symmetry to it because there's a number of significance. There's I think, don't we start collecting grains during Passover to give an offering
well,
to God? And so
it's called the counting of the Omer because there
But
was
it-
an
it's
there was an
50.
offering given,
But
right?
it's 50, right? So there's a symmetry, okay? The symmetry is there's 49 days that you collect the grains, and then the day after, the 50th day is Shavuot, right? So 7 by 7, on the Torah, there's a lot of numerology. So there's seven days in a week and 7 grains. Times 7 weeks, sort of a third dimension, gets you to 49 days, right?
Correct.
And then the next day, which is the culmination, is number 50.
Yeah. But remember, what
Celebrate.
we're trying to understand and answer.
Right?
Let's remember where we were and where we're going.
Mhm.
Why is it that we're counting up rather than counting down? Because Shavuot should be on the calendar. So here's what Rabbi Shapira says,
Mhm.
and this is shocking.
Yeah.
Shavuot is not on the calendar.
Well,
Literally, listen to what the rabbi is saying.
Mhm.
Shavuot is not on the calendar. You know why? Because it doesn't exist unless we count the days.
unless we do it.
All right, so take that one in. Unless we count the days,
Mhm.
Shavuot does not exist.
Mhm. And we even count the day on Shabbat, right? We actually
Yeah. Well, absolutely, because we got to, as you said before, we got to get all 7. Got to get the 7 days times 7. All right, so now if that is really the case,
Mhm.
that Shavuot would not exist unless we counted. Did this mystical rabbi really mean that, or he was just speaking metaphorically? And the answer is he's being literal.
Mhm.
Now, if it's not on the calendar, do we understand why we're counting up, not
Well-
counting down? Because if it's on the calendar, we should absolutely be counting down.
Mhm.
But if it's not on the calendar, at least we now have some understanding about why we're counting it up.
Well, it's tied to making offerings. It's tied to collecting a grain, making a grain every day, and you're supposed to make all 49, seven per week for 7 weeks.
Yeah, but you see, the thing was that we could have, for everyone to understand this clearly, would it not have been powerful for us to say there are 50 days now till Shavuot. Now it's only 49. Now it's 47. Now it's 20. I mean, that's what you do when you're anticipating something that you're looking forward to, and you count down. Even Reb Shmuli's initial statement about counting down suffering is because what are you counting? If you would do that, you are counting down to what? To the relief of the suffering, right? You're anticipating, when is this thing going to happen? Or when will this thing be over? Okay? But now Rabbi Shapiro is saying something very bold. And he's saying that Shavuot actually would not exist unless we count it. Now let's understand this both from a spiritual and a psychological point of view. What is really being taught here? What does it mean that if we don't count, it doesn't exist?
Well, isn't it like you have to take 49 steps to get to the location. So if you don't take every step, which is, again, it's like taking inventory. It's accumulation.
Yeah, but you see, you've
can't-
all been
You count down, you'll miss or if you miss one, if you don't do it one day, then you won't complete the steps. You won't get to Shavuos. You won't achieve it, because Shavuos is a celebration. It's not a negative. Shavuos is something we stay up all night. We learn the Torah.
right. So Warren, following what you just said, let's all think about this together. If I'm anticipating something and I'm walking down the stairs to get there, right? I mean, obviously we could be walking upstairs too, but if I'm walking down the stairs and trying to get to some place, and then I finally arrive, I feel like I've arrived. I've anticipated coming, and I'm now happy that I'm there. So that's the logic of why we should be counting down to Shavuot, which we anticipate with happiness to get to celebrate. So let's go into, I'm trying now to push this a little to try to get to the deeper level here of what it is that Rabbi Shapiro is teaching us.
Well,
If we don't count, this thing doesn't exist. So what is the meaning of that? If we don't count, it won't exist. So
It's our effort. It's sort of like we're in a boat, and unless we pull on that oar, we won't get to the other side of the lake, and it might as well not exist. It doesn't exist until we get there.
beautiful. Judy, I knew I could rely on you, the collective, to come up with the deep understanding of this. No one's ever given the example of oaring in a boat, but I love it. So it's not that we're rowing to a shore that already exists, right? We're rowing in our rowing, we're creating the shore. The journey itself is creating the destination. And by the way, I never thought of this analogy, but let me just throw it out as a possibility. If the Hebrew slaves under Moshe's guidance, after about a week, they come out of Egypt, and first they encounter this place called Mara, which has bitter waters. And they complain bitterly about the bitter waters. And then they continue and they get to this oasis, which is wonderful, which was actually, if we follow the order of their leaving, that was last week. But then they get to a place where they don't have enough provisions. And in the Torah narrative, God is going to rain down upon them manna. But what if the people said, I'm sorry, I have no interest in going on. take us back to Egypt. If you recall, they actually said it already once. So would they have ever gotten to Sinai? I know we say in Dayenu on Passover, if only we had gotten this far, right? If only we had done this far. But when we understand that if we are not intentional about something, if we are not anticipating something, if we don't count and make it count, then does that really exist? So if nobody counts, what does that mean? It means that nobody is cognizant, no one is aware that we are counting towards something at all. It means that as a collective or as an individual, we have completely forgotten it. Do you know that most American Jews have never even heard of Shavuot? It doesn't mean they don't know what Passover is, or Yom Kippur, or Rosh Hashanah, but most of them have never even heard of the holiday called Shavuot.
Or they mix it up with Simchat Torah. You're talking about like Reformed Jews and
Well, no, I'm not talking about Reform
yeah.
Jews.
Well,
I'm talking about most Jews in the United States.
yeah, but most Jews in the United States are more reformed than the other, and they
No,
don't.
actually, most Jews in the United States have never don't go to synagogue at all, and
Right,
don't.
but they're classified as reformed. My parents went that direction, so
Well, actually, I often teach Shavuot night at a Reform synagogue.
okay.
So
They don't have it at ours. We have 5,000 families, and they never had it.
well, that might be why you have that impression. But here in Denver, the Reform synagogues do celebrate Shavuot, and they make a big deal about the counting of the Omer. But my point is that the majority of Jews have never heard of Shavuot. So for them, do you think they're counting the Omer? Maybe some do, but many of them don't, and that's because they're not aware. They're not counting. And for them, therefore, Shavuot does not exist. So what Rabbi Shapira is saying is not all that hard to grasp, which is that, and what he's suggesting is that it's our count that creates the time. Now, I want to just say one more thing, and then I can open it up for a further discussion. And Reb Shmuley, I know you know this already, so don't jump at the answer yet. But we have an interesting way of relating to time, and that is we start in our Jewish tradition, we start the day at night. Why would we do that? Why would we start the day at night? Wouldn't it make perfect sense that we should start a day when day starts? So why has it been our long-held tradition to start the day at night? Now, when I ask this question, people often will say, it says in the Torah, Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Boker, it was night and it was day. But I'm trying to push a little deeper, which is, and why is that? Why is the Torah suggesting that the day starts at night rather than during the day in the morning? What are your thoughts about that?
The original state of being in the universe was tohu vavohu. It was darkness essentially, and there was no light until God separated the light from the darkness.
Right. So I think, Judy, what you're doing is what many rabbis would do is providing us a beautiful homiletic interpretation that things start from darkness and then become light. So therefore, we're following that. Okay. A beautiful answer. Can anyone suggest another answer about why it is that we start the day at night? So, for instance, we're accustomed to this, right? Yom Kippur starts in the night. We go Kol Nidre, Every week we start Shabbat on Friday night, right? All days, all holidays start at night. Can anyone come up with another reason why it is that we might start at night? And Reb Shmuley, I open it up to you as well. And Judy's answer is sufficient, certainly, but I want to add a possible answer, which I heard from a woman rabbi that that I heard maybe 30 years ago, but it has stuck with me, and I think it's just spot on. If you wanted to say something, Reb Shmuley, please do. If not, I'll introduce this, and I certainly would like
I
to
have a thought, but in the possibility that it overlaps, I'm going to hold back. And then if it doesn't, I'll share it after.
Oh, my pleasure. So, what this woman rabbi said was the following: if we started the day in daytime, here in the United States, we started at 12 midnight. It's not exactly day, but if we started it at 3 o'clock in the morning, or 4 o'clock, or 5 o'clock, or whenever we would determine when we have the first rays of the sun, or a full sunrise, then we would be passive about the start of the day. We would come into the day, as opposed to what? Us creating the day in a way. So what happens? And Shabbat is a perfect example of this. Do we wait even for it to become fully dark to start Shabbat? We actually start Shabbat and holidays a little early. It's still light outside before it gets completely dark. The Kabbalists in Safat in the 1500s, when the song was introduced, Lecha Dodi, they used to go out into the forest that surrounded the hilltop of Tzfat. Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala, right? They would go out to welcome the Sabbath bride. They were welcoming the day in. It's hard to welcome the day in if you're asleep. So the idea of starting the day at night, this rabbi suggested, is a way for us to be active participants, to be anticipating the start of a day. And that is our tradition. That's exactly what we do. So I want to then point out the confluence between these two teachings that we've been looking at today. If we don't count, if we're not aware, if we're not intentional, Shavuot does not exist. It doesn't count in that way. It doesn't count for us. We're not aware of it. Therefore, what's the teaching from that? That we have to be very conscious of our relationship to time and our willingness to do what? To be engaged. Time is not something that just is passive or washing over us. We are co-creators of the time. We are, in fact, creating Shavuot by our count. And we create Shabbat as well by what? Anticipating it every week. Looking forward to Shabbat. If we lost track and we have no idea what day of the week it is, then we don't even know when it's going to be Shabbat. There is an antidote to that, and there's an explanation of what we might do. But when we forget totally about our relationship to time and that we're creating it, we lose out. So in summary, I want to say to you three things. One, consider always counting up time rather than counting down. For we don't ever know what actually is going to happen. We should always be counting up. And I then highlight also the fact that we have to be conscious and in our counting up, anticipating, and this ties into, Judy, something you said before, anticipating what it is that we are looking forward to. That's part of our counting up. Right? And that is why we're counting the these 50 days up, because we really are anticipating the shoreline that will show up as a result of our counting. Any further questions or comments? And Reb Shmuley, was your thought different?
My thought was different, but your thought is great. I don't need to share mine. Thank you.
All right. All thoughts are great because they lead to other good thoughts. All right. So I think because Valley Beit Midrash, as the video started with, talked not just about Jewish learning, but also about social action. In the blog that I wrote this morning, I talked about the fact that I like to eat matzah on what's a holiday that many of you may not know exists, which is called the second Passover, Pesach Sheni, and that was yesterday. I mean, my particular tradition is to make matzah brai from some of the matzah that's left over from Passover. But I think all of our hearts were broken yesterday, because there were families in Israel that chose to release a video of their daughters being taken into captivity into Gaza. And I do appreciate, I think it was Warren who was drawing the parallel here between the days we're counting the Omer and the days that the families and all of us are counting for how long all of these 5 women and also all of the others have been held hostage and counting. So social action is also about thinking of all the things that we can do to support those families, to raise our voices, for people to understand the plight of all the people that are suffering, including these hostages. And now in particular, my feelings and my thoughts are about these particular women who have certainly suffered tremendously and are continuing to suffer, and as are their families. So whatever action you can take, whether it's support, whether it's financial, I wish I could go to Israel today and make matzah brai and distribute it there, but we can do other things to show our solidarity and our concern and share that we are suffering too, that we are in pain. We feel this trauma. I feel it every day, but yesterday and today, it is felt almost like a searing pain. And that's also we can't lose sight of that, right? We have to, when we're counting those days, we're counting up, hopefully for their release, but we're counting in order for that shore to actually show up, which is for them to be released. So that's our hope. Kesha or Keisha, you asked, can I elaborate more with time and different dimensions? If I'm invited back, I'll certainly be happy to add a little more about the time dimension, because we need to understand that the measurement of time is different than the time dimension itself, which we are all swimming through. The time dimension is what ages us, but it's different than how we measure time. All right. I'm close to the now of the hour. So I wanted to just thank all of you for participating. And I don't know, Reb Shmuley, if you had any closing comments you wanted to make.
Usually Alex does, actually.
I'm sorry, Alex, go ahead.
I just want to thank you so much, and I'll pass it to her. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Dr. Sanders. It's always a pleasure to learn with you. And as Rabbi Shmuley mentioned, we'll have another opportunity to learn with Kabbalah experience next week with Melanie Grunwald on embracing impermanence for mindful living. And speaking of the situation in Israel and the hostages, if you're in the Phoenix area, for those that are, we have a rally coming up on Yom Yerushalayim. So we would love for folks to join us if they're available, and you can email me if you'd like to learn more about that. So thank you all for being here and learning with us.